You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. That's right. Every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to share the news from the last few weeks. As we do when we're Han Solo, we share some Talking Headways podcasts coming up soon. Before that, I don't have any really big news or anything. There's just lots of stuff going on, lots of news and information, lots of things happening in the world, in the United States, lots of protests and such. But we're just going to talk about the transportation and urban planning news as they connect together with the things that you all care about. So here's what we did on the Talking Headways podcast, which is our Thursday show. Every week we bring you a show about transportation, urban planning, urban design, all those fun things. And we put out one every week. Since last Monday's show, we had Sujata Srivastava on from Spur to talk about stuff going on in San Francisco. Spur, yeah. So I'm in talks with them to do something really fun at the end of the year. So stay tuned for that, or maybe like in September-ish. So stay tuned for that. Think planning, news, information, trivia. Yeah. So stay in touch. We'll announce something when it gets closer to what's going on. We also had Chris Burdick talk about his new book called Clamor. There was a great story about London in there, about how they were trying to create a good soundscape for the electric buses. You know, electric vehicles are so quiet that they don't really give off a noise that people can hear, especially people who are visually impaired, and folks who might not be otherwise paying attention. So they invented some sounds, and it was a really cool process, a really cool idea. And Chris shared that in his book, but shared so much more. The book was so amazing. And I didn't, when I got the announcement that I was coming out, I looked at it and I was like, I need to talk to Chris about this. But I don't think it's obvious to more folks that this is something that urban planners should read. So I hope folks go and check it out. I don't know if Chris was expecting an urban planning audience per se, but it's a really great book, and I hope folks get a chance to check it out. Bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. You can find the book in there. And coming up, we've got Alana Proust. She came on to talk about commercial space and small scale manufacturing. And we talk about housing in cities. We talk about transportation in cities, but we don't talk about commercial in cities too much. So that was really, really super interesting conversation. Alana's an old guard transportation person from Smart Growth America, and we overlapped in a few years when T for America was going on. So Alana that was a fun conversation with her. Madeline Brosen was just recorded this morning discussing findings from LA's mobility wallet pilot. Really interesting stuff there. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you all, hopefully next week. Adi Tomer is coming back to the show again to talk with us about an idea for a transportation-based block grant that should replace formula funding. I found this a really fascinating idea, and I'm looking forward to talking to Adi. Adi is always fun to talk to about all kinds of stuff. David Prythurch will be on to talk about his book, Reclaiming the Road. Carol Martins will be back soon. I'm still feeling a bit behind on my podcasting. As I said, I recorded Madeline's episode this morning, and that will be coming out next week. And then Adi will be out probably the week after that, but I'll be recording that Thursday. So I'm just kind of trying to catch up and try to get ahead again. I feel behind. I don't know why, but I just feel behind. So maybe I can catch up. Maybe we can catch up. And if you have ideas for the podcasts, send them my way. I can't promise that we'll cover everything or that I'll definitely get to it, but I can promise that I'll look into it. And I've had some good suggestions for podcasts in the past and that have come to fruition. So I really appreciate you all, sticking your nose out and saying like, hey, I want to cover this subject, or I think this subject is interesting. So send them my way if you get a chance, theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Also, thanks to everybody who's ordered Bus or Bike scarves. If you'd like to order one, just head on over to theoverheadwire.com or email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Just got an email, actually just like 10 minutes ago, the East Bay bike auction is coming up I think in September. And so 2 of the scarves are going to be there at the bike auction. So it's cool that the scarves are being used in that way to raise funds, to help organizations, but also to show your support for bike lanes, bus lanes, and all the active transportation things in between. The bike-only knit scarves are definitely back in stock, so check those out. Also, as we always note, you can become a supporter of the show by going to Patreon, patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We have a cool feature for the Patreon supporters now. If you give as little, I think the least amount they'll allow is $1 per month. So you can support us by doing that, and you'll get the podcast ad-free. And that's a really cool thing because I know I'm due ads right now. I mean, this is an ad basically, but it'll be ad-free from the ads that come from Libsyn, which are the soda ads or car ads or whatever else, the things you want to avoid. If you become a Patreon supporter, you get to not worry about all that stuff. And you get your own feed that goes straight in your podcatcher. So I load those up and looking forward to, folks signing up and getting the fare free, the free fare podcast. But also we appreciate it if you all listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice as well. You can also support us by getting books off the bookshop site. I've already mentioned it before. To get Chris Burdick's Clamor book, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. You can get any book you want by going to our store and then typing in the name of the book. We've had really great support through that. I really appreciate it. It really helps us support all the stuff we need to support, including, paying for editing and hosting and all the stuff that podcasts need to have done. Also, obviously, we have our Cars or Cholesterol t-shirts and merch, and anything you can dream up, you can order through TeePublic with our congested heart image that Richard Wozensky designed, bit.ly/carsrcholesterol. You can find Richard's work on Instagram at Dick David Sketches. Thanks so much, Richard, for doing that for us. And I hope folks are really enjoying the shirts and mugs and everything else, the stickers that folks have ordered lately. I know I've seen those, hoodies and stuff. I've seen those go out too. So really appreciate that. We also strongly suggest that folks sign up for the newsletter. That's the main way that I do my work. We do it through subscriptions, but also there's so much stuff that comes through there. We've also got the archive there. 100,000 items are tagged by topic and city. I'm always trying to improve that too. We also just redesigned our website recently, so there's a better search function for all that. Anything that you want to know about in the planning world, I'm sure we've tagged it at some point, and you can read all the articles about that topic from the last 10 years. Well, no, it's 12 years now because we started archiving in 2013. So it's been a while. We've been doing the newsletter for 20 years almost. We started in 2006. So we're keep on going and keep on moving on. And also, this is episode 173. We're live and in session. And it's Monday afternoon, and I'm a bit punchy because we recorded a session this morning. I just finished the newsletter. I'm writing the Substack post for later. I wrote a whole thing about a grist article about serial killers and lead poisoning and smelting plants. And I've been thinking, and there's a lot of stuff going on this week. My daughter's birthday, we're having a party for her, and just a lot going on. So I'm just kind of, I'm punchy right now, but that's okay because we're going to talk about lots of interesting things. And of course, before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that you can get your podcast and Talking Headways wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast Podcasts, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Thanks to those who subscribe through podcatchers. It's great that you're here right now listening to this show because of them. Or if you're on the Patreon feed for that matter, Patreon is another way to get the show. It's a podcatcher of sorts now because folks who are subscribed can get their podcasts there as well without ads. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave us a review on iTunes. Okay, you're not here for that though. You're here for the news. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. These were the most popular in the Overhead Wire Daily. I got a new URL shortener. We were at Bitly for like 15 years or something like that. So I could track like how many clicks each of the links got when I shared them on multiple areas. Like if I go to LinkedIn or if I go to old Twitter or if I'm on Blue Sky now. or in the newsletter. I post I get stuff auto-generated from when I post stuff into the archive. And so we've got a new one. And so it doesn't make you stop at a way station on the way to clicking through. But it also tells us which ones were the most clicked on, which ones were the most popular, what are people interested in. And then I can share those with you all and the folks at Greater Washington, Urban Milwaukee, and Streets.mn when we do those link posts on Fridays as well. So first up, gas stations are getting bigger. With many gas stations set up to build more charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, they're also expanding their footprint to build out shopping experiences for customers waiting to charge their cars. On the extreme end, these gas stations can clock in at over 75,000 square feet. Most new gas stations have a footprint of 6,000 to 7,000 square feet and have until recently mostly been located along highways. But now these larger gas stations are moving into suburban and urban parcels, conflicting with local land uses. This was by Kevin Williams in the New York Times. And super interesting. As we move towards electric vehicles, I think gas stations are going to have a different changing role. And now they can become places where, until quick chargers, where you can charge your car in less than 3-5 minutes like it takes you to gas up, there's going to have something to entertain folks and to get people are going to get out of their cars and go and want to do something while they're waiting for their car to be charged. And so I think a lot of those big gas stations, the Buc-ee's and the Sheetz and other ones that folks know, the Flying J's, are just going to be getting larger and more exotic. And it's funny, we were talking recently, and I'll talk more about this at the end of the show. We do Puppies and Butterflies and the listener comments, but we were talking about Stanley Tucci and the travel shows or the food shows that I watch on Netflix or National Geographic Channel or wherever. And one of the places that Stanley went was actually a place that was set up in the 50s for drivers. And it's a really fancy restaurant, an Automat, I think is what it was called, or something along those lines, in Italy. And so now there's like fancy restaurants along the sides of the highway, and they're like a thing there, which is really fascinating. And this is a long, gas stations, way stations, all that stuff has a long history. But I think as they encroach on urban areas and suburban areas where the parcels are smaller and the land uses are different, it's going to definitely cause some problems. So it's interesting to see how they're conflicting and also how cities deal with it. I know a lot of cities have TOD ordinances, for example, that say no gas stations. And I love to tell this story because I think it's so hilarious. I went to a gas station industry conference that I was invited to talk about urban planning stuff and city stuff. I was kind of the odd man out in that conference in Denver. But what was interesting about it was I was talking about congestion pricing. I was talking about all these other things, and I got peppered with questions. Why don't people like urban gas stations, or why can't I build a new gas station in an urban area? And I was like, well, the thing is, urban land is very expensive, and so nobody really wants to build a gas station that's such a low margin business. Also, they have to deal with all the the permits for putting the gas pumps in and all of the stuff you have to put underground, and then you have to get remediation later on. It just doesn't work like that. But it was so funny that they just didn't understand that urban land prices are really, really high, especially here in San Francisco. And so why would you want to put a 1-story gas station in when you can put like a 4, 5, 6-story building in? It was really interesting to talk to those folks. And there were lots of really interesting conversations that were had, but I think that was super interesting, and I love to tell that story. Anyway, emissions reductions from active transportation. Next up. Most research on reducing transportation emissions focus on mode shift, often overlooking the potential impact of changes in trip frequency and length. New research suggests that while shifting transportation modes reduce an individual's greenhouse gas emissions from transportation by 37%, incorporating changes in trip destinations and frequency led to a 51% reduction. This was in Transportation Research Part D, Transport and Environment. So this research shows that, we've talked about how, switching modes is really important. We want to get people out of cars and into active transportation. We want to walk, bike, take transit, or take an electric vehicle. But what we didn't do as much in the past was talk about, well, what if when you switch vehicles, you also can switch trips, or you can limit your trips, or you can make less trips? What does that do to your emissions profile? And actually, it turns out that it reduces emissions even more. So you go from 37% just replacing a trip with a trip to doing the destination and frequency changes, where you get a 51% reduction in emissions, which is fascinating to talk about, considering this is something we should have thought about. I mean, people were thinking about it probably, but they just didn't, think about getting it on paper and research. So here it is now. And that was a very popular article. I must say it was one of the ones that I have the most clicks on over the last several months. Hundreds and hundreds of clicks on that one. So that was really interesting to see how that one was very popular. I think people are looking for those solutions to making those changes. Indiana expands its Road to Zero Academy. Indiana-based nonprofit Health by Design is partnering with the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute to hold regional workshops as part of its Indiana Road to Zero Academy. The nonprofit will teach the safe systems approach to traffic safety to local planners, staff, and residents. Additionally, Health by Design will provide customized crash analysis and technical assistance to high-risk areas to identify solutions. The group's partnership with the state is increasingly important as the federal government cuts funding to programs that support active transportation and green infrastructure. This was by Madeline Haynes in News from the States. Really great to see this. Basically, they're educating people about Vision Zero and the safe systems approach, hopefully taking it further than a lot of other cities have in the past. As we know, the Vision Zero moniker isn't the only thing that's needed to make Vision Zero work. And so what's needed is a lot of push by local elected officials and folks that planners, staff, etc., who need to understand how this works and what to do to make it implementable. The dark roof lobby is winning. Cool roofs, including those painted with lighter colors, have been shown to increase energy efficiency of buildings by reducing temperatures by up to 50 degrees. But roof manufacturers who produce dark-colored materials have successfully lobbied for a rollback of cool roof laws across the country. Research has shown that a cool roof can reduce a building owner's annual energy costs by 20%, while darker roofs are more likely to increase costs for those who can least afford them. This was by Ames Alexander in The Guardian. So there's a bunch of folks who put black roofs on buildings in states like Tennessee, and after the state passed laws against putting in black roofs because they are not energy efficient and they create hotter temperatures inside these buildings and homes, those industries lobbied against it and they got it repealed. This is just kind of one of those silly things where I get that people are worried about overregulation, but 20% is a lot of energy. And so if you're saving people that much money by requiring cool roofs, then why don't we require cool roofs? Perhaps it's a little bit of an upfront cost to do that change, but I think that sometimes we can kind of roll back regulations too much because it's just a benefit to the business owners and not necessarily people. What is a third place really? Definitions for what constitutes a third place vary. Are third places where people can socialize in public or places where people can control every social interaction they have? J.S. Saxena examines the evolving public and understanding of third places and how they're changing. This was by J.S. Saxena in Eater. Interesting, because what the article states and what Jaya talks about is really fascinating in that, can every place be a third place? Are only certain types of places third places? Is it only bars and restaurants? Is it the local skate park? Where is actually a third place and what does it actually mean? And I also found interesting the discussion about whether people can control social interactions. With the pandemic, I think people have turned a little bit more inward. And so going out means you have to interact with people that you might not otherwise interact with, good and bad. And so the ability to control who you're talking with, when you're talking with them, is something that people have when they stay at home, but not necessarily when they go out. But people want to go socialize, but they may not want to socialize with the person that wants to socialize with them. And so there's this kind of evolving discussion about what it means to go out, what it means to be in public, what that means for the idea of a third space. When you go out into a bar, you're somewhat opening yourself up to being chatted with by someone next to you. I know that for me, when I used to go out, I met some friends, that I've had for a long time now that I met just chatting with at the bar. And so it was a beneficial thing. But there was also times when I was talking to people I didn't necessarily want to talk to, or that pushed their way into a conversation they weren't involved in. And so there's all those interesting kind of ideas about what maybe a third place is and how social interaction should work in those places too. So interesting article, longer article. I highly recommend reading that one. Of course, all these articles will be in the show notes for you to click on if you want to go into depth a little further. Supreme Court starts a permitting revolution. An 8-0 Supreme Court decision could change how future energy and infrastructure projects approach NEPA and the assessment of environmental impacts. The court ruled that second-order downstream effects of a project are not subject to consideration. In this case, that means a proposed railroad intended to facilitate crude oil exports in Utah can only be evaluated for its local impacts, not its global effects, including those related to climate change. This was by Robinson Meyer in Heatmap. Yeah, I think there's been kind of like a snowball effect to the NEPA policy. And while I really do want to see all the impacts, especially stuff like this, where if you're extracting oil from the ground and the railroad is actually permitting that extraction, then there are some downstream effects of the environmental impact of that railroad. There are obvious connections between the two. But at the same time, if we're trying to get projects built, a lot of these things can be frivolous, especially when you're talking about like in California, where folks in Berkeley were talking about like the noise pollution from students who live in a college town and those types of things. So the snowball effect can get to the point where you're overstudying something. I realize that there are some instances where it might be beneficial to be able to say that there are some downstream effects, some second order effects because of something you're doing. But at the same time, if we're trying to build a lot of infrastructure, if we're trying to build a lot of, say, energy generation for renewable energy and things like that, or high-speed rail for that matter, you don't need to study every single effect that goes 10 stories down. At the same time, there's positives and negatives to that, because then you can also build some oil and gas infrastructure faster, for instance. So there's going to be positives and negatives from this. But this was really interesting. That was an 8-0 decision by the Supreme Court. And so, we might see this impact other decisions down the line from a permitting perspective. Regional rail could benefit urban riders. In the United States, commuter and regional rail lines are often built for suburban commuters alone. Alon Levy argues that in some cities around the world, urban riders benefit more from these types of lines because they provide frequent service and space stations to provide express-level service. On Berlin's S-Bahn, only a quarter of the ridership comes from its suburban areas, suggesting a strong connection to urban rail networks that can also significantly benefit suburban communities. This is by Alon Levy in Pedestrian Observations. Yeah, some of those, basically transit networks, they benefit the urban environment, and because they have those urban rail networks and the S-Bahn and things like that, you can actually improve transportation in suburban areas. I think they're all connected. And so I think that's part of the problem why we have in the United States is if you don't have a good urban transportation network, it gets harder for people in the suburbs to take transit inside because they can't access what they need to access. And so those second order effects of that system expansion aren't seen. So the thing would be to improve your urban networks really well, and then you can maybe branch out to the suburban networks, or build your suburban networks to be very robust so that you can impact the urban networks as well. Next up, NIMBYs prefer planes over people. Some residents near the Santa Monica airport, set to close for good in 2028, would rather allow the airport to continue to operate than use the site to build more housing. The airport closure represents an opportunity to redevelop 200 acres in a city with an average rent of $4,000, and opponents don't want any of that land to be available for development before the next state-mandated housing plan is due in 2029. This was by Jack Rost in Fast Company. So silly. People are just against housing for some reason. They don't want housing. The idea here was that the Santa Monica airport was going to become a park. A 200-acre park. Now, we know from parks that, that's nice, but you want to have spaces that are defined. You want to have places to go. 200 acres of park, it's not necessarily something that is the highest and best use of the property when you could actually have housing in a place that's desperately in need of housing. But also, you can create a whole neighborhood that has lots of parks in it, lots of smaller parks in it for 200 acres and still have lots of housing. And so it's silly that they are thinking that the only thing that can come out of this is a park, especially with so much land. And so they would actually prefer that the planes stick around, because if the planes stick around, that means that land can't be part of the housing element. If that can't be a part of the housing element, then they don't have to see housing later on. But ultimately, I think that I'm hoping that the housing will prevail, because it's silly to want to extend the life of that airport just so you don't have to have people living near you. Okay, these are some bonus items from the last 2 weeks that I thought were interesting, but maybe other folks didn't that were reading the newsletter. I don't know. They didn't get as many clicks, but I thought they were fun. A recent paper from UCLA suggests that lower ridership in dense areas of Los Angeles has coincided with rising rents, suggesting that gentrification and displacement are impacting transit. This was in CalMatters, and this was a paper by the Lewis Center and Michael Manville. I talked about it with Madeline Brosen this morning, so you'll hear more about it in the next week. But I think it's really interesting to think about, the idea that as gentrification happens, there's two things that are happening. One is the housing units hold less people. So people get pushed out because of housing costs. People will move in that might not have as many residents living in that place. And so you might go from a 2-bedroom house that gets sold to somebody. It was being rented out before. The 2-bedroom might have had 4 people in it, and now it has only 1 person or 2 people in it. That reduces the number of people that take transit, but also it pushes those people out of the transit area and maybe into other places in the region where they have to own a car, or they don't have as good access to transit, or maybe they have to make less trips per day. And so there's a push out. And so I think that's a really interesting discussion, especially in LA, where in the past we've seen kind of this boom in car ownership from low income households because people are trying to get around the city, which is notoriously bad with traffic, notoriously large. And the transit system is, doing the best it can in a region that's built around highways for the most part, and regional centers, which work really well, but all the places in between are getting more and more jobs. USDOT under Trump will end the practice of promoting disadvantaged businesses, including those owned by women and minorities, in contracting for transportation projects funded with federal monies. This is in Reuters. So no more DBE contracts for women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses. It's all going to go to the white guys. Look, this has been something that's been happening for a very long time, the DBEs. I know a number of folks who have started businesses and been able to operate them and thrive because they started out with, being included at one time as a DBE. And so, it's just a way to give people, a way to get into the game and keep going. And from now on, it might just be large conglomerates that get some of these contracts that were going to smaller guys. And so the agglomeration of business is really frustrating to me, especially from like engineering firms or from like construction companies. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, but then, some of those bigger companies don't have time for some of the smaller projects. And so it can get kind of frustrating, especially if you're not letting people into the system that are being excluded for reasons that they can't control. So it's frustrating, and it's frustrating that it's going even further with the Trump administration. More Chinese trucks are going electric as the county continues to push towards lowering emissions. But this move is also likely to change world energy markets, as China is the world's largest importer of oil, of which 70% goes to road freight or construction. This was in Transportation Topics. A new report from the University of Wisconsin Extension has found that high housing costs are driving some people to delay medical care, resulting in worse long-term outcomes. Some of the delays include not picking up prescriptions or scheduling preventative care. This is by Wisconsin Public Radio. Miami Beach elected officials and residents seem to be at odds after a poll release suggests that an overwhelming majority, 79%, support expanding Metro Mover, which elected officials oppose. This was in Miami Herald. So the elected officials don't want the Metro Mover, but apparently they're in the minority by a lot because their constituents want them to be expanding it from Miami to Miami Beach. I must say that when I've stayed in Miami, it would have been nice to have a transit access to Miami Beach to go across the causeway to get there. Now there isn't one, but it would be one of those things that's very nice. When last time I was in Miami for the MPAC conference, it was nice to use the Metro Mover to get around downtown and get to the high speed, the Brightline station, and the subway to go to the airport and all those things. It would have been nice to go to Miami Beach as well without having to take a taxi or get over the causeway in another way. Okay, so I was, this is one of my intros that I'm going to kind of read out because I think it's, something I wanted to read to you all. I was doing some research for a podcast and came across an article in 2017 when the Trump administration tried to take money away from Caltrain for its electrification project. Republican legislators were mad that the project would share tracks with high-speed rail. Then Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao wouldn't sign the previously approved funding grant agreement and tried to take the money back. Eventually, Senator Feinstein and others stepped in to save the funding for electrification, which has been very successful in terms of travel times, ridership, and emissions reduction, just like decongestion pricing, which they are also trying to kill, but failing miserably. So instead of trying to help California build the line, those legislators have been trying to destroy it for over a decade and starve it of funding. Now they are at it again, trying to pull $4 billion that has already been agreed to. The feds have only funded 18% of the project thus far, with 82% of the funding coming from California. It's always been frustrating that the feds have outsized say on some projects, even if they contribute smaller amounts of money. This is especially true of transit, where the match has been less than 50% for a long time. Of course, in this instance, even though they want to, they won't likely kill it. But they've already got the political headlines in the papers that they wanted. As usual, I know there are lots of opinions on this project, the California High-Speed Rail project, and I'm mad that it's gone so slowly too. There have been lots of bumps in the roads and differing opinions on decisions, but I can't help but think that this project, if completed, will be just as beneficial and revolutionary as pricing. And now I read yesterday, actually, this is in addition to what I wrote in my Substack /intro/ on my website, that Matt Iglesias said we should kill it too. No, screw you, Matt. We're not going to kill this project. And let's finish the damn thing. It's cleared environmentally, so the hardest parts are over. Construction costs and tunneling are a pain in the ass, yes, but this thing needs to go forward. Otherwise, I don't think we'll actually get a HSR trip that's not from Vegas to the desert in my lifetime. So screw you, Matt. No thanks. You can, go do your own thing over in DC or whatever you're doing over there, being lame. Please stay away from my high-speed rail. That's all I got to say about that. Bologna, Italy has reduced speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour, 18.6 miles per hour on 70% of the city's roads to promote safety and encourage active transportation. After implementation in January of 2024, results were instant with reductions in collisions. This was in Euro cities. To monitor increased heat and extreme events, Miami, in partnership with C40 Cities and the Miami Foundation, will monitor temperatures in the homes of vulnerable residents to map out where heat is hitting people the hardest. This was by WLRN. A Cleveland architect is looking at using a byproduct of growing mushrooms called mycelium as a building material. Old building materials are used as feed, and the mycelium can break down toxic compounds like heavy metals. Once removed, the material can be compacted and made into something as strong as wood or bricks. This was by IdeaStream Public Media. A report by Transport and Environment shows how the hood heights of new vehicles have been increasing, which has made them more dangerous. A consortium of civil society organizations in Europe has set a timeline for developing legislation that limits the dimensions of new cars in Europe. This was in Transport and Environment. So the average height of the hood in new cars in Europe is increasing a half a centimeter a year, and it's now at 83.8 centimeters as an average, up from 76.9 in 2010. So that means all these vehicles are growing to get bigger. And according to Belgian crash data, a 10 centimeter increase in height of the hood from 80 to 90 raises the risk of death by 27% for pedestrians, cyclists, and other vulnerable road users. And when high-fronted SUVs and pickup trucks crash into regular cars, the high hood cars impose a 20 to 50% greater risk of serious injuries on the occupants of regular cars, which is why a lot of people have been buying bigger cars in this, basically in this arms race to get larger and larger. And so they're basically asking the EU to basically have a limit. And now, so the average is 83.8 now, but they're saying that the limit should be 85 centimeters for new cars as their hood heights by 2035 to be able to reduce pedestrian and cyclist injuries when they're hit by vehicles. So I think that's a good, important point. I think it's really interesting that we're talking about this they're talking about this in Europe, and we're not talking about much in the United States. It would be nice to kind of go back to smaller vehicles because it is nicer to be able to see over them. For example, I borrowed a friend's car and I was in a turn lane and I was trying to look over this SUV to see where the oncoming cars were. And I just couldn't do it. If it was a smaller car, I probably could have. But it was right. And this is in cities. I know that there's differences and people need to use trucks and everything, and there's truck stuff to be done where you had to move things and things like that. Just a kind of interesting observation, and interesting to see the EU is going that direction. Okay, well, here we are again. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome to support the show and keep on listening and supporting it each month. We really appreciate that. This show and Talking Headways wouldn't really be here without you, so thank you very much. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $10 a month will get you one of our scarves. Thank you for those who have signed up recently for that. And then $2 a month will get you some of our stickers and a handwritten note. Appreciate everybody for supporting the show by listening, by becoming Patreon, by going to the bookshop site, by just, emailing and saying hi. Anything you can do is wonderful, and we really appreciate it. And hopefully you really enjoy this show as much as I enjoy creating it. Listener questions and comments. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. So last show, I asked if you all like food shows and whether it'd be cool to do a transit-oriented program where we went all over the world or the country talking about transit systems and stuff like that. And apparently, actually, it already exists. Russell E. Taylor III writes, I like your idea for a transit-oriented travel program. You should talk to the Transit Tangents guys based on Austin, Texas for now, who do similar things domestically and occasionally abroad. I have not heard of Transit Tangents, but I'll go check that out because I think that would be super interesting to see other people doing similar things, a travel guide for transit. And then also Ryan Gorman says, on your last Monday show, you mentioned that you thought a transit travel YouTube show could be cool. Maybe you've seen it already, but it reminded me of Transit Unplugged with Paul Comfort. Of course, that totally I was thinking about that after Ryan emailed me, and I was like, oh yeah, of course. Paul Comfort does this. He has a YouTube channel. Paul's been on the show a couple of times. He wrote the Transit Cookbook and a book recently, and we had him on, and he also does the Transit Unplugged podcast, but he also does a travel show where he goes to other countries and talks with transit agency folks. Yeah, I just didn't think about that one, but it'd be cool. That'd be cool actually to go with Paul somewhere and do one of those with him. I'll reach out and ask if he's open to guests as well. But yeah, so they do exist, and it'd be cool. Also to just do a regular travel show maybe, and just maybe focus on the transit a little bit more. So I find that really fascinating. I find that like bucket list thing maybe to do sometime when I'm retired or something, like just go around and film stuff and eat pasta and film stuff. That'd be fun, right? Have any questions, shoot them over to theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I appreciate everybody who emails in, even the folks who are emailing and asking me not to publish what they say, which is really nice of you all to write your kind notes, and occasionally the ones that are criticizing. I appreciate that too. Puppies and butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe just didn't fit in the other section. Lately, I've been seeing lots of my family, which has been great. I have not been watching much TV. I feel so behind on pop culture these days. It's harder to keep up with everything with all the different streaming sites. I have my food shows and my travel shows, Star Wars stuff, of course, but I'm not sure if anybody's really on the same page anymore, and I feel like behind. So are any of you feel like you're behind on pop culture these days? I feel like there's so much going on that I have no idea about. Maybe it's just because I have a kiddo and the kiddo takes a lot of time. But anyways, you can find me on Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, Instagram, sometimes Threads, Substack, YouTube, and of course on my website and in your inbox every morning if you sign up for the newsletter, and on Flickr at Transit Nerds. Everything else is at The Overhead Wire. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. We'll see everybody next time.
Talk